planned to be an archaeologist, a brain surgeon, a heart surgeon, a meteorologist, and travel the world with Jacques Cousteau. He was an underwater explorer and conservationist that made films for TV. I think Bill Murray's character in Life Aquatic is based on him. Those didn't work out, but she did study sculpture and ceramics at Michigan State and Portland State Universities and received an MFA from Carnegie Mellon. Falk's work considers grief, loss, and communal and environmental survival and collaboration. How might foraged materials be gathered and reframed to build objects and experiences that comfort, support, challenge, and sustain us? Falk has exhibited at well-respected regional and national venues and done residencies in Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and throughout the United States. She was a university art professor for 20 years, including most recently at USC in Columbia, South Carolina. And she recently was the Fall 2024 Fibers Fellow at Colorado College. And Falk is co-creator of www.whatwedonowart and a new art collective called Blue Acorn Art Lab. So without further ado, help me welcome our guest, Naomi Falk.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming to see me today. I've talked to some of you already and hopefully look forward to talking to a bunch more people the rest of today and maybe tomorrow. We'll see how the weather is. So, as Tom just said, I was a professor for about 20 years or so, and I just recently left full professoring and teaching to move to Colorado full time to be with my partner there and my dog Tuesday. So you'll see a picture of her later. But thank you so much for inviting me here, and I'll get going. So play and tinkering are a big part of my process. The things I make often really surprise me. I know I hold various ideas or concerns in my head, but so much of what happens is thinking through making and setting aside the time to goof around. Plus, it entertains me, like Tom and I were just talking about, when I'm not swearing, which also happens a lot. But it's also really fun to do things in unexpected places. So this piece is, do we want to turn the lights down a little bit? So this piece is, back here. Hold, please. You just turn more on. There we go. Very good. Yay! Yeah, I think so. These went on, so I don't know if it matters.
That looks great.
Okay. We'll work with it.
I should go back out now.
Okay. Well, there's some light on the screen, but we're all good. So, personal space capsule, and in 2017, like I said, my partner lives in Colorado, and I was in South Carolina, and so I was flying back and forth all the time. It was very expensive and exhausting. But in 2017, I gave myself an assignment to create a temporary sculpture or site-specific installation, if you will, using gaff tape during a cross-country flight. The meaning of the materials and the location have a deeper meaning right now, or they started to, like, considering the pandemic and like having your own cocoon of space. These are also things that I was thinking about as far as like how far we extend beyond ourselves in my earlier work too. And the funny thing about this particular piece is that only one person in like a 3-hour flight said anything to me at all. And it was the flight attendant, and he came up, and I was in the aisle seat, and full flight, and he's like, "You know you're gonna have to do something about this, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, it's tape, I'll move it." And I'm like, I'll probably be the first person to have to get up anyway. So I gave myself the assignment that I would finish it by the time the drink cart came through. And I did. So I was thinking about personal space, and like I said, how the space around us defines our personal space and how we claim territory and what our public and private boundaries are. For a long time now, I've been playing with this idea of physical and psychological boundaries and about presence and how far we extend beyond ourselves, like I mentioned earlier. So now bear with me here. This is in the weeds tinkering. This is sketching that ended up as a short-lived, scrappy sculpture. I took a kinetic sculpture class with Michael Lorson at Anderson Ranch in 2019, and I found this sparkly bit of partially sewn glittery pink fabric, and it looked to me like a tongue. So I made a custom cam and rigged up a quick support for so the tongue would move. And then I wondered what the tongue might be licking, and of course, a mint chocolate chip ice cream cone. Lo and behold, it was ice cream social day on the last day at the ranch, so destiny fulfilled. And for the critique, the tongue licked the ice cream cone, and the ice cream cone melted until it fell over while we watched. So there, and there is it in action. I find this really ridiculous and wonderful. Play, lick, drip. And there's the sad end. Another fun little ditty was made in 2 hours at the end of another class I took there several years later with the artist Sheila Pepe. She asked us to mash up 3 or more songs to make a title, and then make a work based off of the title. My songs were Peel Me a Grape by Diana Krall, The Mountains Win Again by the Blues Travelers, and Under the Table by Fiona Apple. So Peel Me a Grape Again, Under the Table. I was very literal about this translation. I decided I wanted to practice making a bandsaw box table with balsa wood, and if you've never done it, it's a quite fun puzzle work figuring out how to and where to make the cuts on the bandsaw. And then I sewed some fuzzy little grapes real quick, and I had a lot of fun photographing it too. And the grapes, like so many other things and artworks in my life, became these entertaining little characters. And then these 2 Tinkerbells, Reeling and Untitled Tenderness, came from a series I did during the pandemic. I taught sculpture online for 1.5 years from my dining room, and so collected all sorts of packing material. And I had a very small apartment. So packing material, twine, a ceramic chain I made 20 years ago, threads from other work, a cut paper feather from artist Meredith Haggerty, and various things I collected through the mail and collaborated with her and other people. All very pandemic-y things. And also, for reasons still I don't understand, I keep making works that drool. I don't know why yet, except, I'm serious. Except I always think of my brother threatening to drop a giant loogie on me, which he liked to do when we were kids. And that's a giant ball of spit, if you don't know what a loogie is. It's really gross. But it feels like a leak or a stretch or like roots or fishing maybe, or like quietly feeling around. Speaking of feeling around, I lost a favorite glove a while ago and only had 1 leather glove left. I was rummaging around my studio and found an indigo dye piece with 5 circles on it, and the glove had 5 fingers. So I sewed each finger onto a circle, and it reminded me of the ocean, and the fingers reminded me of rocks. So I hand quilted ripples around each finger of rock, and still wondered if I'm above or below the water's surface as I look at it. Plus, it makes me laugh, and that's a good enough reason to make anything. People really found this to be a saucy little work. This is one block rearranged. from like a week ago I did this, over and over again for an hour and a half. So it's these little paper piece collage little bits for this one particular block. The screenshots there on the left are all variations that only show about half of what I did in that amount of time. The image on the right is the last shuffle, but not necessarily the one that I'll choose. And I think I'd like to try this with a whole bunch of pieces so I can keep all of the iterations, but I also really like that it's fleeting and momentary. I can also imagine these as sketches for sculptures because I'm constantly looking for ways to make sewing and quilting, which is something I'm really working on lately, more three-dimensional. For whatever reason, I can't help it, but I still find a lot of joy in these little ditties that I make, even as it feels like I'm still talking about like boundaries, potentially exclusion, encounters, and the search for connection in the world. And maybe that's the title of this, Encounters of the Third Kind, or Wayfinding, I don't know. So on to some playful collaborations and arranging and rearranging things. Play and collaboration. So this is Shift. The first iteration was in 2012, and I tend to work and rework the same stuff over and over again and use the same materials. Like I've had these 500 pairs of jean legs for about, well, since then, since 2020, and you'll see the progression as we go. So the title Shift alludes to shift work and shifting landscapes, and whether physical or emotional, personal or communal. Sandbags hold devastation at bay, relief efforts, tragedy, oh yeah, trigger warnings here for everyone involved with living in the area and encountering hurricanes and flooding and stuff. I talk about that off and on. All of those things come to mind, along with, making do and rebuilding and hope. And each pair of jeans belonged to someone, were worn until no longer useful, and then passed along. And so I was really thinking about with this piece, what are the things in our lives that we shore up, and what is worth saving, and what should we let go, and when do we do it for ourselves, and when do we ask for help? And participants for this show, it was a 3-month-long exhibition this time, were invited to fill a bag in the corner spot there, and then add and rearrange the sculptures they saw fit. And of course, you wouldn't be surprised that the kids really got into it more than anybody else, and really changed the piece over and over again. It was one of those times, one of the first really big times where I set up a situation for other people to do what they would, and so I really found that as I visited my sculpture, that I was surprised at what happened. Sometimes I was kind of disappointed, but then I had to keep stepping back and going, this isn't exactly mine anymore. And also I felt this reticence to go in and change it myself, which was a really interesting feeling. And then I would literally be like, okay, it's my turn now, I want to go play. And so then I would do something to it and then go back. So I visited, this was in Arlington, Virginia. So I would visit it every couple of weeks. And so that was one of the last versions it was in. And then collaboration and conversations. Sometimes, maybe in the best of times, collaborating with people brings, much deeper and compelling conversations. And I'm showing you a couple of older pieces, but just bear with me. So in 2007, I was living in Michigan near an Air National Guard base, and the Iraq War was in full swing. And it scared me, but I didn't have any direct ties at the time to people there. And so how do I interpret what's happening and how it makes me and many others feel. And I went back to making directly with my hands, using my hands and my body as the tools, kind of wondering, how do we grapple with such magnitude of loss, and what do we literally hang on to? And I've been thinking, about how many people lost their lives and the ramifications of those losses. And doing the handwork is the work, and the physical and psychological act of holding on to a memory. It's a really deceptively simple but powerful gesture. And I'm also thinking about the meaning and etymology of the words and the phrases that I use in the work, in the materials, and how I speak about it. And I call this recalled. Some of the definitions of recalled include to bring back from memory, to summon to return, to bring one's thoughts or attention back to matters previously considered, to revoke or withdraw, and to revive. And at the time, unable to find confirmed numbers of civilian deaths, I chose at that moment to use U.S. troop casualties, which as of September of 2008 was 4,168. And so for each death, I made a hand-squeezed porcelain piece holding the thought of each individual in the palm of my hand. And here's a detail. The blankets and quilts were all borrowed or donated, and had stories, of course, and histories from the people who belonged with them. And that comfort and connection felt like an important part of the piece. But it didn't feel like the sculpture was big enough for the magnitude of the loss. So I applied for an exhibition with this proposal drawing of recalled quilt, and it was accepted. And right after that, I moved to Virginia, which conveniently was 10 hours closer to the gallery. But I only had 3 months to make this piece, and I didn't know how to quilt. I did have a sewing machine, so I watched YouTube videos about quilting. I also went to several quilting guilds and contacted both the community college and some local schools who helped me construct it. So it widened the dialogue about the Iraq War and became a more powerful piece, I think, in many ways, and was no longer just about my own experience. And so the kids here, they're 4th graders, helped me make more bones, as they called them, and many of them, because I was in Virginia too, had family members in the military, and many had been deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. And we talked about holding on to things and some of the ways we remember people and what we do when we miss them. We also talked about how this looked like a seashell, and of course, because, they're 4th graders, poop. But mostly we talked about them as bones or vertebra or little people, because we all have a tendency to anthropomorphize things and make objects look or act like us. And so this is a scene from the opening reception of the exhibition that I was in Charlottesville, and I continued to sew. And partly how this happened was accidental, because I couldn't do the work fast enough, and so the work was basically not complete. But at the same time, I don't think it was a cop-out for me to figure out that the work continues. It could still be, it needs to happen now. And so the fact that there was a wicker basket, and here's a close-up of the porcelain pieces quilted in there. So the fact that I was sitting there sewing and present and doing the work, and then having people from all different walks of life and different political backgrounds coming and having conversations with me felt really powerful. So I continue to think about this piece and about the process of making as the performance and as the work. the reasons that I just mentioned. I also think too that if I were going to continue this piece, that I would have to include everyone, you know, so much. Continuing, environmental and boundaries and the speakers in the way, sorry about that, and us. I also continue to think about environmental and political impacts on my life and the lives of others and where we live, and possible, like I mentioned before, possible trigger warnings, again here, talking about flooding and detentions and emergencies, and I know these all can hit home for so many. Boundings reference flood levels, topographical maps, water flow patterns, and visitors navigated their way through eye-level cage structures with the fencing, which was 5 feet high. As I planned the installation, a second theme emerged. Refugee children were and are currently being held in similar cages without families and in austere, brutal conditions. In my installation, 3 taped elliptical outlines made from my body's, my footprint circumference felt like it represented the presence and absence of me, but also children and us in general, like as a marker. And walking through these forms, I kept thinking about like which side of the flood and the cages and this sort of trap are we on. And then for this piece, which was in this little temporary room that I made, this was a practical problem I sometimes come across when doing installations and room-sized work, is what to do with the portable walls that have to stay in the space. And I ended up making this small room out of one of them and came up with an improvisational artwork that ended up feeling like a powerful companion piece to the buildings piece. Still thinking about the borders and crossings and bounding and safety, the emergency blankets became a landscape in and of themselves, as well as tools for emergency warmth and safety. Hung on coat hooks, each was ready to use at a moment's notice. The title also rings in my ears as the beginning of the game of hide and seek, ready or not, here I come. And the playfulness of that, but also, especially in an adult world, kind of the foreboding of it on multiple levels. Also, you don't get this from the still image, but the rustling and the movement of the thin mylar added a lot to the experience because things would move in like the slightest amount of breeze. And I also like that I included in my materials implied action. And as a part of another solo show around the same time, the leftovers were calling to me. The cinder blocks, 2x2s, and a white handkerchief didn't want to be left out. And so this improv piece felt like an emergency call for help. And then with Disco Avalanche, the 2x2 frames and fort and roof-like gurney structures that I was building, I was thinking about how concern and ambivalence are mixed up with this overwhelming desire to continue to make do and find happiness where you can and be footloose and party like it's 1999. I'm a child of Prince and the early 90s. And you know, in the specter of this rapidly diminishing ice caps and increasingly severe weather, the mechanical spinning of the disco balls were the only other sound in this kind of hollow, off-kilter party as my footsteps echoed through the space. When I moved to South Carolina, I started looking for more, I started learning more about indigo dyeing and the history of its cultivation. And this was a workshop I participated in, where we went to a local farm and harvested and processed fresh indigo for non-fermented dye vats with Caroline Harper, who is one of the big people in South Carolina now. She Charleston several years ago, but if you're interested in indigo dyeing, she's a good person to talk to. It was research for another large-scale piece called Flow, and draws on the textile industry in the Southeast, and it thinks again about flood risks and grapples with our shifting sense of safety and home. Little indigo mother. I led a series of indigo dyeing workshops with students at various schools and locations who kind of like previous pieces helped me make some of the pieces for the sculpture. I talked with students about the history of indigo in the region, including the inextricable and often neglected history of the expertise of enslaved people who were forcibly brought to the US, partly because of their deep knowledge and necessary skill with indigo to the plantations here in the Southeast. And for the workshops, in exchange for their assistance with dyeing the panels for Flow, I invited people to bring items of their own, or they were welcome to take some ready-to-dye cotton that I had. And I also kept a running list of participants, so they all received acknowledgement for their help. And here's the finished sculpture and also kind of a prototype. Eventually, I'd like to fill the entire room so that you walk into this space, you're completely surrounded. And I was thinking still, about the textile industry here and all of that. The dyeing pattern came about because I didn't want to appropriate a particular style or cultural symbol that wasn't mine. And I also wanted it to feel sort of watery or icy. And this is also a very quick one. It was bunched up, rubber banded, and felt kind of effective. And I wanted to show you too the undercarriage, the understructure of the piece. It's like a ladder and leans up against the wall, and it's secured, but I like the fact that it's very tenuous. It's like held up by the friction of the rocks and just like barely, the precariousness of that is intentional. And then this piece is, let's see, I gotta go a little faster. This piece is called Don't Fence Me In. It's a collaboration with photographer Lauren Greenwald, who she made this video of the ocean, and in her video the water kind of rises and falls and ebbs and flows, and these blocky things come in and out. And we projected it from a projector on the floor through these fenced sculptures, so that the shadow of them was across the video piece. And then I remade the piece for a recent exhibition for the Mid-South Sculpture Alliance multidisciplinary sculpture show, and won Best of Show from Jean Shin, which was super awesome. If you don't know Jean Shin's work and you like using repurposed materials, check her out. I had several things to consider here. It was a group show, so my sculpture couldn't take over the whole room like it had before. And I wanted to build a sculpture to hide the projector. And so this little dark piece here is that little critter. And I think next time I may have the sculpture cover up the extension cord too, or make it part of the sculpture more obviously. But, so that's there. And then I've also been feeling guilty about the amount of water that I've been using for dyeing. And one way I've started addressing this is going back to using found and reclaimed textiles and clothing and things, and mixing them in with the hand-dyed pieces. This work was the first in a series of wall installations started when I was a resident at the Hambidge Center, not too far from here. I've been working on these off and on for this last several years, although I definitely see the connection to earlier work. And there's also all sorts of fun stuff in here. So there's lots of jeans, of course, there would be dress shirts, bed sheets, leftover indigo dyed pieces from the flow piece, and some boxer shorts. It's not as bawdy as you might imagine, but it's hilarious that I hid them in there, and that it's one of the things I find fun about repurposing materials in my sculptures. I don't even know if you could see them. You'd probably see them if you looked really closely in person. And then this is the most recent version, I think, using the jeans, and they're getting smaller and bigger as it goes. So this was an exhibition called Terra Incognita. I collaborated. It was all, like the whole, other than these pyramid sort of marker mountainy structures, 2x4 structures, everything else was all improv for the whole show at 701 CCA in Columbia. It was a gigantic collaboration with Greg, and what you're seeing here is, let's see, that would be the right-hand side, looking from the middle of the gallery. And there were 3 more areas in the gallery, including 2 small rooms that I built with the portable walls, which we could not remove from the gallery, and also an alcove space. Let's see if I can play. Oh, whoops, back. So we made, out of styrofoam and some transducers, we made speakers that we built into these sculptures. They've got like a water droplet screen printed on them. And then Greg had a 6-channel audio thing that was like vintage, like 70s and 80s meditation tapes. We had fire, we had rain, we had just a variety of like mixing of these sort of apocalyptic feeling things with this general sense of calm yourself down. And then those were all torn up bits of jeans in different piles that led you through. Now, one thing I was talking about, the audio, the algorithm made it so that the composition was never the same for the whole month. And so, unless you were there all the time, like the 2 of us were, you got a different sort of composition every time. It also changed as you moved through the space, which is something we were talking earlier about, how to document your work. And stuff like this is so hard to capture, like the whole feeling and how it is to move through this space. I think it's kind of a problem for sculpture anyway, but this stuff is hard. Another view of what to do with different places in the gallery. And then when I moved out of South Carolina and to Colorado more permanently, I got involved even more with indigo and the fibers community there. And I still struggle, especially in Colorado, with the amount of water that we use in dyeing, but it's also, like, the process is also really a revelation for people to learn and to make and to learn how to fix things for themselves which also has all sorts of benefits by keeping things out of landfills and wearing refreshed clothing that's so stylish and entertaining. For this piece, Sky Sail, Melanie Audette, Mel Williams, and I, along with a bunch of people from the Blue Hands Collective members, and then over 80, I think it was almost 100 community workshop participants in that region, had an even deeper collaboration for this piece for the We Are the Sky exhibition in 2024. We collected donated jeans and held 5 or 6 different indigo dyeing and sewing events in the area. And here's the view of the sculpture as you walk into the gallery. We created a patchwork of our communities. And again, you know, saying that is very purposeful because the verbal and the visual language both really matter. It also is important to us that all the participants were included in the wall text for the sculpture because we wanted to acknowledge and thank them for their labor and creative assistance and voices. And this is about 2/3 of the panels. We made 10 rows with 16 panels each using triangle pieces spliced and sewn together, kind of playing on abstract sail imagery. And thankfully the gallery had a 2-week window to install the whole entire group exhibition, and they let us build the piece on site. So we kind of had a mini 2-week residency there, sewing like the wind. I felt like I was sewing like the wind. My sewing machine broke, it seized up the day before the installation had to be finished, and some of the Blue Hands Collective people came to my rescue and brought in more sewing machines and actually helped and stayed and helped me sew all day, and we finished it, but holy moly. Oh, and then this is a piece of just a quick video of above the piece, which I really liked. I loved going up on the lift to work way up there, and I really appreciated the textures and how much like waves it kind of looked up there. So maybe next time I do this piece, it'll be in a place where you can see below and above. All right, let's see. Improv, storytelling, memorials, and life. Some of these are really, took me a long time. Like this piece took me over a year to make because it's all hand done. But this piece is a story of how my partner and I re-met after 26 years and mapped our journey between South Carolina and Colorado with detours through Pittsburgh and Michigan over the years. We met, re-met during the eclipse in 2017. He came to visit out of the blue, so there you go. And then here's another piece I began while I was learning improv piecing and sewing and quilting. It's kind of an oddball, but it's a nice story. My dad died about 11 years ago, and I still have some of his clothes. And this idea of layering family and care and repurposing old and worn materials is, you know, I think a lot of people do that, especially right now, again, or still. But those things are really deeply embedded in quilt making. And my dad was a builder of houses and of philosophical relationships. And growing up, he called his construction build business wizard's work. And when I found some vintage 70s yellow and green calico at the Creative Reuse Center, who gives a scrap, which is near where I live, the fabrics reminded me of a shirt he made me, good 70s thing to do. And my second favorite childhood companion, a beanbag frog. So memories of him and my childhood and our relationship ended up becoming stratified throughout this piece as I built it. Scaling rafters and rooftops and roaming around a half-built, shark-infested house, playing in other people's gardens and still within sight or hearing distance, all layered into this funky little piece. So we're still connected. And his plumb bob there on the right, it's hard to see maybe, is weighing level and true. And then another improv piece around the same time is Care 1 Month CLL. As my partner, and this is the beginning of my sabbatical at USC, my partner found out he had chronic leukemia and began treatment in January 2024. And so I began to make work about his and my experiences during that first month and then ongoing throughout. I pieced and sewed this while sitting with him in the hospital infusion center. And the base fabric is a sleeve from the hospital gown he was wearing when he found out he had cancer, and the center glow-in-the-dark orange studs represent the inflamed lymph nodes in his chest. The CT or the scans of, like, they just were like, kabing, if you all know what that's like. So on the right side, the left in the image, is his port that I appliqued on there with indigo and fabric. And on the left side, or the right side of the photo here, is the sparkling IV solution. The sequins represented both the immunotherapy and his white blood cells. And on the back of it is a blue wool for the simultaneous warmth and comfort, but also his experience of being extremely itchy during the infusions. And so the piece may be worn around the neck as a neck and chest piece, as like kind of this bib, or it can be a wall piece. And then something in progress. I'm thinking about all of this improvising, and this fun little ditty has been lounging around lately, but she doesn't have a name yet, and I kind of feel like it's a song. But maybe that is actually her name. And then here is another sort of quilt in progress, and I share it because there's some goodies in here that I've been thinking about. I'm making a quilt about clothes and patterns I can no longer wear because I can't look at them anymore. After a long bout of vertigo in 2017, things like this make me quite dizzy. It's like too much visual noise. And so I can imagine, because I'm one of those people to like poke it, go, ow, 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 it still hurts, ow. So I can imagine a whole series of things I can no longer look at. But there's also moments of rest in here too, which makes that's what makes it possible for me to even do this, I think. But I also think that there's something deeper and conceptually, culturally, that I could mess around with that are difficult to face, but still sort of necessary. And so I think while it feels sort of surface in a way, I mean, it's certainly talking about like my physical experience or whatever, psychological experience, but I think through that I can get to much more. I'm not sure what it will be yet, but. And then we're getting close to the last couple pieces here. Here's a good example of the importance of art residencies and giving yourself time to experiment. I was thinking about things I was having a hard time looking at and had the idea and feeling of this busy cloud kind of hanging over me. And I also began building a wearable piece that began as a dress that you'll see here in a minute. When I was at the residency, I didn't have any work completed, and I had a show opening in a couple of weeks. And I was thankful for this little basement studio space with low ceilings, and it made it really easy to try out this idea. And then along with that, I also started a series at that residency in Silverton. Every day I looked for something delightful or entertaining or compelling in some way. Sometimes I photographed a delight, other times it came from playing with found bits, like the compass there with the fur piece on the right. Other things included here are tracks and a snowy crosswalk seen from above. That's, I found my pointer. It's lost, okay. So that's bottom left there. A comet sighting that night, a snowy mountain view through the window, and then waiting for my boyfriend to get a colonoscopy, and a few aspen leaves left on a bare tree. You can tell how old I am. So thinking about this piece, so this is the culmination of that piece, like what it grew into. And I was thinking a lot about a quote from Jenny Holzer, who is lovely with words, from her survival series from the mid-'80s and early '90s, saying, "In a dream you found a way to survive and were full of joy." And so, like, thinking about dreaming through playful making in search for delight in such anxious times and you know, momentary nows and nows and nows. I was inspired by Ross Gay's Book of Delights. And so this work kind of considers what it means to dig through what remains. And here I was using donated quilt tops, clothing, some canvas, and survival and adventure gear. When I was at the fellowship at CC, the outdoor rec group donated a whole, like 30 tents and like 3 parachutes to me. And so this is where, like, I got gifted all this stuff and I went, now what? So here's what happened. And so I think about it generally as like improvising and folding in old and new stories and some kind of finding ways to discover softness and survival and abundant possibilities. And this dress was a surprise. I found a red velour robe or house dress in a thrift store that was a lot like my grandma's. And I started piecing in these tents and parachutes and added fake fruit to the tent window in the front. My grandma was a wonderful baker, and I remember her saying with a sassy little glint in her eye, "How do you like them apples?" I just remembered that last night because I keep going, what in the world is this work about? And so I'm still not quite sure, but this gathering and this release of the fruits seems like the right thing to do. And I mentioned I grew up around construction and kind of half-built things, and continue to think about the meaning embedded in the materials that we and I use. And so, because this new work was fast and it's still new, I'm still open to suggestions and like trying to figure out what has happened. Like some of my other work, I certainly see references to landslides and water pooling and emergency landings and barely held together but fashionable train or gathering with a pieced quilt top in there and lots of texture. It's really been snagged. And again, I really have fun with the words and language that I use. And it's inviting to look at this piece and big enough to wrap up in or hide behind. And so, I keep wondering, have the safeties and the comforts or adventures failed? I don't know. But my mom recently asked me, actually a couple days ago, if it's about loss. And maybe it is, but it also feels like it holds hope. Like it's still cared for. And I keep wondering, how do we live our lives and find ways to do good when things are not so good? Another emergency piece I made that became one of my favorites from that show is this little quickie called Fuzz, or What's Left. I had other plans for the swing. You saw a minute ago I was sitting in the swing in that dress and everything. And I didn't want anybody to sit in the swing at that point because it wasn't safe yet. Problem solving. So I draped a white coverlet fabric over the seat and added a little red fuzz. And this quick playful thing, you know, and anxious, like pressed for time, like, oh, what am I gonna do? And watch out, I'm about to talk about bodily functions. It reminds me of getting my period and swinging kind of between embarrassment and curiosity. And it's kind of cheeky and cartoony with its bright primary colors and flexible, soft materials. And I also appreciate how the shadow there looks like a mitten ready to catch it. And so many people, like, I had no idea what was happening with this other than like, it's something. And then all the women that came into the exhibition were like, I know what that's about. And I went, great, tell me. And then we were like, yes, that's absolutely. Like, it's really obvious and also like, kind of not, which that's a good sweet, that tension there is a good spot. All right, we're at the end here. So I tend to make and remake work and try things out in different spaces. And for the terrain biennial, I called this version Cloud Mending. And I completely remade it in 2 weeks. Do you sense a pattern here? I thought I'd be able to take like the previous version and just go bloop. Not so much. But, no problem. So I rebuilt the whole thing. And then as usual, I often find myself getting more and more detailed the longer I tinker with things. Which, you know, I think is a little of this, better this way, better that way, better this way, better that way, add a little of this, and voila. And then this is what it's like to work on a big piece at home in my living room with my dog Tuesday, who really enjoyed helping. So the goal of this show, which I really appreciate, was to get art out into communities for everyone to see, rather than in a white walled gallery space. And I feel like this piece, Cloud Mending, fulfilled its destiny on my park porch, at least for now. So as I finish up, I will leave you with this quote from the Book of Delights by Ross Gay. And my class, when I was teaching a five years class at Colorado College, read one of his essays every day in class. And so you can substitute essays for artwork or any creative endeavor you choose, along with any of our sentences. But I really appreciate this developing of a delight radar or a delight muscle, because he talks about how the more that he looked for it, not to say that there's no difficulty or sadness or anything else in the world or in yourself, but that the more that you go and you look for it, the more you find. So, it's very deep but a powerful, powerful thing. And so what's next? I'm hoping to work on recycling more dye water, more improv, more listening, more comfort and support, more delight, more softness, more making quilts, more three-dimensional, see the previous comfort and support, and working with people, creating memorial quilts and palliative care and more wayfinding. So more thank yous to you. I made it.
We might have time for one or two questions. If anyone has a question they'd like to ask Naomi. Yes.
You talked about improvising.
Yeah.
Which is great, and I love seeing that and hearing you talk about that. And I'm wondering,
It's a great question, because it's definitely a balance. I think, with a lot of the pieces, I can have like a general idea, like there's frameworks, like there's the space that I have. And depending if there's a theme for the show or not, but if I've got the space and then I go, okay, well, maybe what's my budget? Although I tend to, as long as I can just afford to do what I wanna do, I'll do it, but the budget thing is definitely a huge issue, especially now that I don't have a professor job, supporting me anymore. But I tend to use and reuse materials, and I find that compelling for as long as I have a place to store stuff. So I'm getting off track. So the space, and then I sometimes think about the materials that I have, and if there's an idea swirling around or something, or a person or a group that I want to collaborate with, like what are our concerns, or what's going on right now, like how do I want to make people feel, maybe? You know, so then it's like, well, what can I build, what can I make do with? Like, what can I build to kind of talk about things? But a lot of times, it just ends up being like, maybe there's a time limit, especially with the smaller pieces. Like, I'll just have stuff around, and I think that's really important. And I forget that myself, because I put stuff away and then I quit working. But if I have even just like a corner of the table, literally like a corner of my dining room table, if I have some stuff there, I just walk by and I go, choo choo choo, choo choo choo, you know, and we'll move things around. But usually, you know, like with this piece, I had built a I'd done a previous version, and so when I applied to the terrain biennial, for example, I took a photo of my porch, and I just made a little digital sketch of those on my porch, and so I had a real idea of what it might look like. And then I didn't put a sketch of the sky sail, the indigo dyed, the big group piece that I made, but I just did 5 or 6 different sketches, and then for the proposal for that, just submitted the sketches with my previous work, and said, this is the sort of idea, but I don't know where it's gonna be located, so depending on the size and the location, we can change the scale of it, or the shape of it, or whatever. And so then the gallery directors, or whoever I'm working with, just because hopefully they've seen my other work, they just trust me to do something halfway decent. But it's sort of like, I've gotten very good about kind of educated guesses. Like, I'll go, okay, I'm gonna take all of this fencing, like I'll have a pallet worth of fencing delivered to the gallery, and then begin, you know, and in 3 days I've built something. It's a lot of pressure. And I kind of developed that way because of necessity in some ways. Like, I both really enjoy, like, figure out what's next, like right then, like all of those quick decisions, it lets go of like having to really mull things over. And if I find I'm mulling things over, then I have to walk away for a little bit and then come back. Because I'm not making any, like I'm just spinning. And it like I have to trust, especially, it takes a lot of practice. So hopefully, just over the years, I've gotten better and better at that practice, so I can make definitive decisions that actually will hold and not be a junky pile of misery. Because then, you know, but then if I fail, like, what's the worst that's gonna happen? 5 people are gonna see my show and be like, meh. I mean, hopefully that's the bare minimum, but I mean, no one likes to fail, but also like, so you keep trying, you just keep going. And each time I think, you know, the porch piece was better than the previous version, and it was partly, or everything had to do with, I just had another bunch of time to work with it. But I just, like, because I was so busy with my teaching, with work and teaching and everything else, like, I developed into working that way because that's the time that I had too. And so, like, if I keep wanting to make these installations or experiences for people to get into, then I don't know, like, it's just how it's happened, but yeah. Improv for life. And the yes and part of that, like, especially with teaching, I think so much of teaching has taught me to keep going with that too.
So I think it's 1 o'clock. If anyone has any other questions or wants to talk to Naomi, just come down and, you know, we can keep the conversation going. But thank you all for coming, and thank you, Naomi.
If anyone wants a card, or I have a few postcards left over from the Dreaming Delight show, if anybody wants anything.